Welcome. On behalf of Synosco, it's my pleasure to welcome you to our 11th webinar about asset integrity management. My name is Marcel Sminia. I'm co-founder of Synosco, and I will be facilitating this webinar. And today's topic is maximizing the value of your APM and integrity systems. Let me start by introducing our guests of today. We've invited Mark LaPlante and Luis Corrado, two industry experts that will discuss their opinion on this matter. Mark's career spans over 28 years in enterprise technology, and he's a recognized expert in asset management standards and practices. He played a significant role in shaping international standards through his involvement with ANSI US Technical Advisory Group. In addition to contributing to the ISO 55000 set of standards, he has held various leadership positions within the field. Luis is an engineer with a postgraduate degree and an MBA in safety. With over 18 years of international experience in inspection and integrity, he's currently a solution engineer, manager, and trainer at Synosco. So before we start our discussion today, let me just outline the framework of this discussion. We will start by exploring why asset management is important, and then we will take a look at 7 key questions which Mark likes to use. These can serve as a guidance to achieve asset performance management maximization. Then we will explore the systems needed to fully understand and manage success. For this, we will reference a value chain model for asset management. At the end, we will have some time to answer questions. I believe we received a few up front, but please feel free to put any questions that you may have in the chat. And also please note that if for any reason you experience connectivity issues, a refresh of your browser will bring you back into the web. So let's get started. Hi, Mark. How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you. It's a delight to be here.
Good to have you. Hi, Luis. Good to see you again. How are you?
Hey, Marcel. Good. Thank you. Good to be back again.
Awesome. So, asset performance management and integrity management both are centered around asset management. Why is asset management important? Let me start with you, Mark.
Sure. Perhaps we can start with the definition of what is an asset. So if your audience may be familiar with the ISO 55001 set of standards, it's defined as an asset as an item, thing, or entity that has potential or actual value to an organization. And it goes on to describe an asset as something that an organization decides upon to have in place in order to achieve their strategic objectives. And there's a number of things that go into the consideration of acquiring assets: the nature and purpose of the organization, its operating context, its financial constraints and regulatory requirements. That's got a particular significance to asset integrity, and the needs and expectations of the organization and its stakeholders, both internal and external. And so asset management as a system is involved in the balancing, or its chief objective is to achieve an optimal balance between cost, risk, and performance of assets. And so I would encourage your audience to familiarize themselves with that standard and to adapt the definition of assets, why they are significant, and how the outcomes and objectives of those assets need to be aligned and consistent with the objectives of the organization.
Okay. Can anybody hear Luis? I'm missing.
Yeah, Luis.
Sorry.
I'm sorry, Luis. I can't hear you. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry,
back.
I put on mute to cut some birds, but yeah. So I like that framework, right? So and how you juggle with these elements, with these equation. So if we go into the risk part of things on our side, there's going to be the integrity management, the corrosion management. So everything we talk about, everything, kind of a bread and butter of mechanical integrity, safety instrumentation, RCM, will squeeze into that risk part of the equation, a lot into guiding on the cost side. But yeah, I think it comes also along the a pure risk management approach, that we used to have in the past, and today it's more incorporated into the overall asset management, right? So, and you can also look into operating context and how that kind of data relate to each other, right, Marcel?
Okay, so what I understand is the maximization is then really a balancing act between cost, opportunities, and risk. So how can this balance or maximization be achieved?
Sure. So you mentioned earlier the 7 questions that I like to refer to, and I'm just showing them on screen here at the moment. Let's start with the first 3 questions. The first 3 questions are grouped together as what we would call the status of your assets, and it's a cautionary tale that if you can't answer these first 3 questions, there are consequences. So at one extreme, the consequence could be wasted money and resources. For example, I've worked with organizations who complain about writing work orders for equipment that no longer exists, or there could be job plans for equipment that simply cannot be found, right? And so at that very basic level is a great deal of inconvenience and wasted resources. Now, at which can be annoying, but at the other end of the extreme, there are events in which people's lives are at risk. For example, in San Bruno, California, there was a gas pipeline that exploded in a residential neighborhood, and the engineers of the utility testified during the investigation that the information about the pipeline defects and their locations was not reflected in the company record, right? And so when we go to ask these first 3 basic questions, what assets do we own and where are they? What are they worth? Not in terms of what you paid for them, but what are they worth in terms of the organization? Remember, the definition of an asset is an entity, item, or thing that has actual or potential value, right? It's not necessarily what you paid for it. And then the third question is, what condition are they in? So in this particular case, this devastating event that claimed numerous lives in a residential neighborhood, that utility couldn't answer those first 3 questions. And so the consequences were quite dire and devastating. So when we look to methodologies such as RCM or RBI, you cannot do those types of apply those methodologies successfully without the physical and hierarchical location of the data of assets and asset systems.
Yeah, I like to I like that framework. It reminds me a lot of the 7 RCM questions, for example. And I think there's some, we discussed that before, and how the RCM questions related to those, right? It also consists of a 7-step approach. And for me, what I like, and some people don't appreciate that relationship of a functional location and an equipment. They don't see that relationship. Why do you need the whole asset hierarchy? Why do you need the site, plant, unit, and that kind of organization? So on kind of the integrity management, also on the safety instrumentation, having that relationship between a flock and an equipment, that's quite important. Then you start analyzing, do you have the right data? Do you have an equipment for a function? So if you have a heat exchanger as a functional location, and you don't have an actual hardware, the physical piece of equipment on that functional location, you see they already have a gap. So you're not answering, where are these assets, right? So you don't know where they are if they're not performing that function.
Yeah, indeed.
I like that relationship. Yeah.
Can't answer those first 3 questions, and you can't answer the first 2 or 3 questions in RCM either. You can't draw a boundary around the equipment. You can't select the equipment from the hierarchy, and you're stuck at square one.
Yeah. And you need both. Yeah, just to complement, I think you need both. I think you can do an RCM for a function, but you can do an RCM for an equipment, right? So that's the upstream, downstream version here at Synosco. Is like these different areas we'll use differently. I think the safety instrumentation, because it's a design, they still don't have that physical equipment. They might call it a tag. So, right. It's like a function location as well. Then you have an equipment. Once, you bought that equipment and install it. But yeah, that's go on, Marcel.
Different topic, but that might be a good topic in the next webinar.
Yeah.
Indeed.
It's possible.
Shall we move on to the next 3 questions, the effort questions?
Right. So the next three questions are pretty intuitive. I think people understand these questions. We all drive cars and we own homes and fishing gear and boats and what have you. We all know what it means to own and utilize assets, and we also know intuitively that if we don't put any effort into preserving the function of those assets, that is the care and feeding of the assets, they can and will fail. And so when we transfer that intuition to a capital intensive organization like an oil and gas or a fertilizer organization, we use these methodologies to answer these questions, including RCM, FAMICA, RBI, SIL studies, and what have you. Those are all examples of how we quantify asset risk we are exposed to, and the level of residual risk that we need to get down to, the protections that we need to invest in and have in place in order to effectively mitigate that risk. And that typically results in the asset strategy that dictates the life cycle activities that must occur at a given frequency all along the mission time of that asset and system. And so when we look at these next three questions, what do I need to do to my assets? When does it need to be done? And what frequency? And how much will I need to spend? Those three questions represent the level of effort of the care and feeding of assets that then needs to be in place.
Yeah, so I think you mentioned a few methodologies there, or disciplines, if you wish, when you're talking about different equipment types, for example. What I like to bring in here is I always trying to bring that correlation to an integrity management system, right? As a mechanical integrity, as a maintenance strategy, maintenance reliability, safety instrumentation. So on that effort, if you look at the broader scale as like a one integrity system, you can see the data from the different disciplines at the same place. So you can have a better overview or better understanding of the effort from different angles, right? So you have a reliability looking into your exchanger, but you also have a compliance, you have an integrity, you have degradation, you have an instrumentation connected to it, you're going to have a flange. So if you have all the data on that operating context, on how that equipment is maintained and the equipment around it's maintained, it will give you a much better understanding of that effort. So for me, that effort is kind of really the core, what you kind of do on a daily basis. Yeah.
Well, I think what you adequately and very well described was the interdependency between the status of the assets and the effort that needs to go in. You need to understand all the degradation mechanisms of those assets and the failure modes to a detailed level, and before you can begin answering those questions 4, 5, and 6, right?
Yep.
So that brings us, I guess, to the last question on sustainment. Mark?
Sure. So that's the seventh question, and the seventh question is about several things. So what the thrust behind question 7 is, what does success look like, or the sustainment of the care and feeding of your assets? If you're successful, how will you know you're achieving that balance between cost, risk, and performance of assets? The other thing it points to is that after you've done your study, you need to operationalize the strategy that results from that study. So it's important to ensure that you're achieving the full effect and value of your study. RCM and SIL assessments and integrity studies are a lot of work, right? And operationalizing the asset strategy enables you to monitor its execution and to observe for emerging threats and changes to the risk profile. It's one thing to do the study and then to execute the strategy, but it's another thing to monitor it as it progresses over time, because nothing stays static, right? Risk is dynamic, and degradation mechanisms and failure modes can also be dynamic as well. So finally, there's the aspect of having a strategy that needs to be consistent and aligned with the strategic objectives of the organization. The term is often utilized as from the shop floor to the top floor, right? And so the results and outcomes on the efforts that are put into the care and feeding of assets, that is through these strategy methodologies, should be evident to the internal and external stakeholders of the organization. Internal stakeholders being the director level or board level. External stakeholders, a good example of that, regulators, right? And the people that live in the neighborhoods in which we operate. So that's question 7 is knowing if you're successful, how would you know?
Yeah. So just kind of bringing back to the integrity and reliability. So an example, right? So I think when you look at the question 7, how effective you are, you're looking at
Mhm.
the very strong KPIs, right? And say, how can I standardize and say validate that I'm on the right track? So we have these in reliability. There's methodology that you can have like a maintenance efficiency index, and then you kind of correlate your cost of failure versus the kind of versus the maintenance costs, yeah, and what is the residual risk. So you get the number, right? You
Mhm.
get that index and say, okay, whatever is higher than 1, you need to kind of, you can optimize your inspections or maintenance and reduce that a little bit. If you have a lower value, it means that you have to do more, yeah, to reach that level of risk and that efficiency index. So I think it's a very good. I was bringing with the RCM and in validating the things you're doing. I think it's a great example.
I think you're speaking to some level of efficiency and effectiveness as well, because RCM, for instance, isn't meant to drive an organization to over maintain their equipment, right? Nor to under maintain it as well. So
Yeah.
there's a precision level where you achieve that balance. So
Okay. So to ensure success, we need to establish the risk first, right?
I think everyone looks at risk. Risk is a clear clear concern at the board level. I mean, you bring it back to the domestic asset management, if you will. We buy liability insurance for our vehicles, where certainly in my jurisdiction we're not allowed to. It's an offense if you don't have insurance on your vehicle. So it's one of these foremost concerns, right? And so starting off with risk is certainly an important aspect, and that same intuition applies for the types of organizations that our audience are part of. And so we have to consider that, first of all, in these capital intensive organizations, that enterprise risk and operational risk meet at the critical asset. That is, if there were to be a loss of containment event somewhere, almost nothing else going on that day would matter until it was resolved, right?
Okay. So the value, when you're talking about the value maximization, or so that's going to be the what you project as an ROI. It can also be seen as what is the value that you're getting out of those actions, right?
So there's one, yeah, for sure. And if you look at the graph here, starting off with risk, the bar on the left hand side is your total risk exposure.
Yeah.
You can see the line drawn to the acceptable or the residual risk that you're willing to tolerate, and this is a monetized graph, so it's expressed in terms of money, of dollars or euros, and so the value of the difference between your risk exposure and the money that needs to be spent on the protections is the return on investment. And so this is a very simple way of expressing that little gray square is the effort that needs to be put in, no matter what the methodology happens to be, whether it be RCM or RBI or what have you. That represents the level of effort and investment that goes into the protections that are needed to achieve that risk mitigation.
Okay. Yeah,
So,
I think just to did you talk already about the PDCA?
so when we look at the return on investment as we answer questions 4, 5, and 6, it's found in this value, between the unmitigated risk and the mitigated risk, as we already stated. And so when we collect, when we have that collection of asset strategies, that the result from your studies, if they're in place and they're working well, or in other words, if your asset strategies are operationalized, they should be able to follow the PDCA cycle or the plan, do, check, act, so this value can be achieved over time. And so as we extend this intuition, we can see that risk doesn't necessarily stay static. It is dynamic. We will have aging assets, which will bring about other or accelerate certain degradation mechanisms. There will be assets that are installed in their early life, and if you understand rates of failure in the bathtub curve, there are certain failure rates at the beginning and near the end of life across the life cycle or mission time of those assets. And so being able to answer questions 4, 5, and 6 in a systematized way is truly about achieving value from these studies that we utilize to build strategies, but also to be able to execute and maintain, monitor, and operationalize these strategies over periods of time and sustain a positive ROI over that same time period.
Yeah, no, I think it's we also look at that continuous process. We call internally here at Synosco, and my colleagues are tired of me talking about the integrity life cycle. So where you have the foundational elements, you have an equipment care strategy, an asset strategy. When you optimize multiple disciplines, you execute an action, and then you kind of learn and improve, right? So you get based on those KPIs, I'm above. What do I need to do better or change my foundational elements? So I think we are quite in the same, almost in the same page.
Well, I think it's a great example of aggregating marginal improvements over time, right? Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, that.
So now that we understand the 7 questions and how they are answered, what are the systems that are needed to fully understand and manage success?
So we've got economic principles of this model, and I'm looking for the slides here. Here we go. When we look at this, what we'll call the value chain model, and these are economic principles that were developed by Professor Tom Smith from the University of Wisconsin. Now, many in the audience may have seen these type of triangle or pyramid models before, but I think the intuitions are there. So asset management practitioners should recognize that what goes on at each level of the triangle, and should also recognize the methodologies that are applied. So if you look at the left-hand side, at the lower part of the triangle, we're looking at being efficient and we're being cost effective. As we move up to the next level, we're looking at what we spoke about earlier and what the ISO 55000 standard says is about the performance, cost, and risk of assets. As we move up further, we move into a phase of value optimization. So we go from managing life cycle costs, moving into a regime of value optimization the further up we go. So it's about maintaining that return on investment that we just spoke about. And so when we look at the lower portion of the triangle, we're working to answer these first 3 questions that we talked about. And that's generally governed by certain methodologies such as work order standards and job planning and those types of things that are generally enabled by the EAM or CMMS system. In the middle section, we seek to balance cost, risk, and performance in order to successfully realize value from assets. And those are generally governed by methodologies such as RBI and RCM and so on, and are generally enabled by asset performance management technology. As we move towards the top of the triangle, the value of the efforts made should be aligned and consistent, like I mentioned before, with the strategic decisions and the strategic objectives of the organization done by management. And so my thought on this in general is that we, as reliability professionals, as asset management professionals, need to be having more active conversations with the risk management people within our organizations, the people that work in financial planning and analysis who have a role within the risk management of the organization. Because as I mentioned before, enterprise risk management and operational risk meet at the critical asset.
Yeah, so looking at that a value chain from an integrity perspective, right? So I think we can look at that. It actually crawls a little bit from the base, a little bit to the what has been classified as a performance management. So we have we would use the asset database from a CMMS, for example, as a foundation, where all the bulk of the actions will happen on a daily basis. And then you would have that the asset risk, which is at the top, feeding, giving an asset strategy, that will trigger some condition monitoring and will give some predictive maintenance, right? So the integrity management system, you can squeeze in a lot of the fundamentals inside asset risk, right? So that's where we do your risk management, your defining consequence and probabilities and looking at different failure modes. So you see that is stretched. So there's some activities where there will be kind of very connected to the CMMS, but you also have like inputs to top management for the decision-making process.
Absolutely. You make a good point there, that the ability to marshal data and information from the lower levels of the triangle to the higher levels of the organization, so that top management and the board can make decisions in a much more, with a great deal more visibility to information and data about their assets. And remember, the nature and purpose of an organization is one of the key factors that determines the type of assets that organization have in place. And I've seen on occasion, we have organizations whose nature and purpose changes. They may decide to or just redistribute those assets, and so the risk profile changes altogether. We also see examples of how effectively answering these 7 questions within the scope of this model. We see this in energy transition, for instance, in power generation. This model has been applied to manage assets that have a completely different profile, where before it was steam turbines operating at that base conditions. Now you have photovoltaic and wind turbines, and so that brings in a whole set of elements of the types of asset classes and types from than they had before. So it helps the asset management system become adaptable.
It's time to conclude, guys. So, Mark, would you like to add something?
I think I would certainly like to encourage the audience to visit the ISO 55000, what we call the working group TC 251 website. I'm certainly glad to give that link. It is a technical committee website. There is non-commercial information. There's a great deal of resources and case studies for those who would like to familiarize themselves with the ISO 55001 standard. And I encourage organizations that they really focus on building out their workflows and ensuring that there is some adequate intersection between those work processes, whether it be for rotating assets or whether it be for containment assets or safety instrumented functions. There are some very excellent ways of drawing out these work processes to ensure that we've got the optimal intersection between those workflows to be able to achieve that desired balance between cost, risk, and performance of all the assets, not just a particular class or type.
Yeah. Luis, any last words?
Always. And so to wrap up, I like, when organizing, we spend these events, we think about the title. And when I look back at that, maximize the value of our APM and integrity system, how to make the link to the topic. Yeah. What is the message that we're trying to convey here is that there are multiple systems, right? Those multiple systems will work together to generate value for the company. So you need to understand what is the asset organized, what is involved. And sometimes you have a system like an integrity management system that will require some data. There's a reason that data has been requested, right? To look at the data generated by other disciplines. What are the connected data? So for me, it's important to show how, you have to think holistically at multiple angles, right? You have to answer the 7 questions. From that 7th question, you create a loop, right, within your effort. So it's a continuous process. So for me, it's more about how users of an APM, as users of the CMMS, users from an integrity management system, how they can squeeze the maximum value of their system is by looking at how these different areas work together, how they crunch their data, how the data is correlated. Use the systems with care, right? Say when you do something, when you fill in a checklist, provide the data, because that data, it's connected with everything else. So for me, is the closing and how we tie everything back, an integrity and an APM to maximize the value for the company, but also to maximize the value out of each of these systems or software, like our IMS, for example. I think that's it for me, Marcel.
Dave?
Thank you both. Like I said, we received a few questions, so let's move on to those. First question I have here is, I'm an inspection engineer. How can I influence that process? What about a field inspector? Luis?
Yeah. So I think maybe I got inspired on my conclusion by that question when I read it. So for me, is how each of the users can be. I've seen on the attendance list, there's a lot of inspectors, right? How does an inspector can contribute to maximizing the value of an integrity system? For me, it's about understanding that's part of an overarching ecosystem of, you have your CMMS there, those will not be replaced. An integrity management system is about calculating corrosion rate. So make sure that you enter the right data, that you clean your data, you keep your data tight, that your corrosion rate, gets your approvals, get the system to work. Remember, it's a cycle. Mark called it the PDCA. I called it a life cycle. So getting that, and if you're different disciplines, right? So if you're safety instrumentation engineer, safety engineer, or if you're pipeline engineer, and you can always keep an eye on it and say, keep that ecosystem alive, keep it functioning. And answering the 7 questions from Mark.
Thanks, Luis. So here's one from Mark, I think. This question says, does the ISO 55001 standard have specific provisions for asset integrity?
It certainly does not. It's not a technical standard. And so for those who might be curious about that, I'll give other examples that your attendees might, or your audience might be familiar with. ISO 9001, I think most people are familiar with. That's a quality standard that's been around for over 30 years now, perhaps the most popular, well-recognized one. That's about protecting an organization's reputation, right? It's the quality standard. And 14001, which I think the audience is also familiar with, is about protecting the environment. So ISO 55001 is about protecting your investments in your assets, right? And so it is a management system standard, which requires no software. It doesn't require any sort of enabling capability. It is really at the strategic and management system level in which the standard should be applied. Now, there are technical standards that fall below that, and there's some excellent ones that have to do with with reliability and integrity, but those certainly go much lower than the scope of the ISO 55001 standard. So, good question.
Okay, thanks. And next one I have here is, what are the differences between enterprise asset management, EAM, and asset performance management, APM? Want to take that, Mark?
Yeah, I could take a stab at that one. So I think in the very simplest terms, EAM or enterprise asset management system is typically a work management system, right? So it determines the transactional work that needs to take place. An APM system is work selection, right? What I mean by that is EAM is work management, and APM removes work, right? It determines what work goes into the pile, whereas the EAM system is about executing work. What APM does, it rarely functions on its own. It does require the EAM system. As you remember from the diagram, right? EAM system is very foundational, right? It governs the answers to the first 3 questions. APM is really purpose-built about leveraging the status of the assets to determine what is the level of effort that's required to go into those assets. APM is also useful in determining whether you're over-maintaining or under-maintaining your assets over time and reaching that reaching the balance that we refer to continually.
I'm gonna throw you under the bus, Mark.
Okay.
Now, can you compare integrity management system with an APM?
So
we did a whole webinar on that before, and maybe we need another one. But throwing you under the bus.
I think all of that falls within if integrity management or RCM, or whether it be containment or instrumented systems or rotating equipment, if we're in the process of asking questions 4, 5, and 6 and leveraging the information related to the status of our assets, all of that falls within APM.
So an integrity management system is part of an APM.
When you're looking at purely applying the methodologies to answer those questions, it is asset performance management. Now, we'll have the market is making some arguments about what APM is, and when you look at digital solutions, there are offerings out there that call themselves APM but are simply predictive maintenance technology, and there's offerings out there that call themselves APM that have only to do with safety instrumented systems, for example. Those are part of APM, but they don't represent all of APM, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, we could go on and say EAM versus CMMS, but I think I'll stop here.
Oh, I hope so.
Thanks, guys. So the final question I have here so far, it says, what are the differences and similarities to the 7 RCM questions? Is it just the number 7, or?
Yeah, no, I think we touched on this a little bit earlier. So if you look at the Mowbray questions, what's question number 1? Well, first you have to select your equipment. So the equipment has to be on a list somewhere. So, that implies that your asset data needs to be somewhere where it can be selected and where you can apply criticality. The second question is around defining the boundary of that system and deciding what are the failure modes that could prevent that function or that system to fulfill its function. When we look at the 7 questions, it's about the status of the assets, right? So they work together, but they are in fact separate. Whereas the 7 questions of asset management is perhaps an abstraction layer above what you would use in the Mowbray 7 questions, right? I think we can conclude very strongly that in order to obtain the successful outcome of an RCM study, information related to the status of the assets is essential before you can even begin.
Here, thanks. Just got something on the chat here. One of our viewers says, I would like to add a point on the value chain model of asset management, mainly on the life cycle activities. Mm-hmm. He says we need to include data from the EDW to effectiveness of asset performance data. Could be a subset of APM. Any comments on this? Making sense to any of you?
I'm not familiar with what EDW is. I think it's an enterprise data warehouse. I think he's talking about. I think it's engineering data or specifications or. So for me, it's an asset database. So for me, it will go there and then that will be available at each other system, right? So I'm not sure if I understood that quite well, but for me is. Yeah, data from an EDW as that data warehouse and engineering data is in the asset database, and that will feed into all directions. Really, whenever change you have at the top, say, you took a decision to change a process, add an equipment, that will have to cascade it all the way down, update that data, maybe run the fitness for service or any other methodology. So that will go up and down, right, Mark? Add something.
Yeah, I agree there. I mean, if there's an enterprise data warehouse that contains information that can be used for APM purposes, then absolutely. Perhaps it might be useful for us to do more of an asset management workflow that includes, RCM and asset integrity and SIL assessments and show it, in terms of workflow, and then we can map the sources of data that are most significant to each of those parts of the work process. Because the same thing could be said for a number of maintenance and reliability workflows. Is that what's the data that's going to enable us to get the answers we're looking for, ultimately to build our collective understanding and knowledge and enhance the quality of our decisions over time. A lot of that information may exist in an EDW.
Yeah, I think that's the last question, and we have a couple of minutes. Just to elaborate, I think, Jackie here in the question, elaborate a little bit more on the data handover whenever you're going on a startup. I think there's, these systems will talk to each other. They will recognize they're going to be exchange of data through APIs, that interface, API from an interface perspective. So that EDW data will have to follow a specific standard on how you can record that data. I've seen a lot of content lately on the CFOs. There's these harmonized standard on how to record that kind of data, right? It can be a pressure. So that pressure will have a specific code. That code will have a specific unit of measure. So whenever you're interfacing different systems back and forth, going into commission, going back into maintenance, that data can flow easily back and forth within a proper integration.
I think there's a great deal to be said about the engineering, procurement, construction phase as well, and how an EPC organization or an engineering contractor has all of this asset data coming from multiple vendors and needs to have a way of being able to assemble all that information into an organized tag master, and then be able to produce a master data and asset register from that. I think there's elements of this triangle model that can be touched upon and pre-established as early as the project level, right? As we're designing the plant or designing the production train before it goes into construction, we can have a lot of these footings set within the process at the engineering level.
Right, great.
Okay, guys, I think that's all the questions that we received. So with that, I'd like to wrap it up for today. Our time has run out. So thank you for this informative discussion on asset performance management. To all of you viewers watching, thank you for your time. I hope you will be back soon, because please take note that this webinar will soon be available to download from our website. And then we will have a follow-up webinar soon. It's scheduled for the 12th of September. And the topic will be practical insights into test procedures, FMEA and SIF-proof test coverage. So hope to see you then. Thank you for your attention, and until then. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for joining us
Bye-bye.
today. Bye-bye now.